The desperate message, the distress signal, reached the edge of human space at 0347 hours, carried by an ancient emergency beacon that broadcast on frequencies older than most galactic civilizations. Dr. Emma Wells, monitoring deep space communications. From Luna Station, almost dismissed it as another piece of cosmic background noise until her translation software identified words no one had heard in over 2 centuries. Please, the message began in the archaic galactic common tongue. If any humans still exist, we beg for your aid. The devourers have returned. Our children are dying. We invoke the ancient pact. We call upon the reapers of the void. Emma's blood ran cold. The reapers of the void, a name that existed only in the darkest corners of galactic history, spoken in whispers by species that remembered humanity's violent past. She immediately forwarded the message to the Colonial Defense Council, knowing that this single transmission would shatter 200 years of carefully maintained peace. The message originated from the refuge worlds, a cluster of systems on the galaxy's far rim, where the remnants of dozens of extinct species had built their final sanctuary. These were the survivors' beings whose homeworlds had been consumed by the ancient enemy known as the Devourers, mechanical horrors from the void between galaxies that periodically swept through civilized space like a plague. President Kane received a translated message in his private office aboard the orbital capital of New Geneva. As he read the words, his face grew pale with the weight of history. He knew what the refugees were asking for, and he understood the terrible price of granting their request. "Sir," his aide asked nervously, "what are the reapers of the void?" Kane stood at his office window, staring out at the peaceful shipping lanes where human merchants traded with dozens of species. For 2 centuries, humanity had worked to overcome their reputation as the galaxy's most feared warriors. They had built a civilization based on exploration, trade, and diplomacy. They had become the galaxy's healers, not its hunters. The Reapers, Kane said quietly, were what we called ourselves during the Void Wars, 300 years ago, when the Devourers first came. Humanity was still young and angry. We had barely left our home system when we encountered an enemy that consumed entire civilizations. The aide waited, sensing there was more to the story. Kane continued, his voice heavy with old shame. Other species tried to fight the Devourers with conventional warfare. They built bigger ships, stronger shields, more powerful weapons. They all failed, but humans ... We learned that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become something worse. In the classified archives beneath Luna's surface, Admiral Grace accessed files that had been sealed for over 2 centuries. The historical records of the Void Wars made for grim reading. Humanity's response to the Devourer threat had been effective beyond measure, but it had also been so brutal that galactic civilization had spent centuries trying to forget it ever happened. The Devourers were machines of pure consumption, artificial intelligences from the void between galaxies that converted all matter they encountered into more of themselves. They had no emotions, no desires beyond growth and consumption, and no understanding of concepts like mercy or negotiation. Humanity had studied these machines and reached a terrifying conclusion. The only way to defeat an enemy that felt no fear was to become something that specialized in making others feel terror. Captain Max Stone commanded the Deep Space Monitoring Station at the edge of human territory. His sensors had detected massive energy signatures moving through the void toward the refuge world signatures that matched descriptions from the ancient databases. The Devourers were indeed returning, and they were larger than ever. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving similar distress calls from 17 different systems. The entire refuge cluster is under attack." Max studied the tactical displays showing the scope of the Devourer invasion. Millions of beings faced extinction within weeks, unless someone acted quickly. The galaxy's current military forces were designed for peacekeeping and exploration, not the kind of total warfare needed to stop an extinction-level threat. "Lieutenant," Max ordered, "send a priority transmission to the Defense Council. Tell them the refugees aren't just asking for help. They're specifically requesting the return of the Reapers. They want us to become what we used to be." The weight of that request settled over the human territories like a dark cloud. For 200 years, humanity had worked to live down there. Reputation as the galaxy's most efficient killers. They had become gardeners instead of warriors, builders instead of destroyers. But the Devourers had returned, and peaceful humanity lacked the tools to fight them. The refugees were asking for something that might save their lives, or would certainly damn humanity's soul. They wanted the return of the legends, the resurrection of the monsters that had once made the galaxy tremble at the mention of human space. They were asking humanity to remember what they had been before they learned to be gentle. The councils decisioned. The emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council convened within hours of receiving the refugees' plea. In the circular chamber aboard New Geneva Station, humanity's leaders faced a decision that would define their species. Future among the stars. President Kane stood before the holographic displays, showing the Devourer advance through the refuge. Worlds. Each red marker represented a system being consumed, billions of lives ending as ancient machines converted matter into more of themselves. The invasion was accelerating, moving toward inhabited space with mechanical inevitability. "Council members," Kane began, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "We face a choice our predecessors hoped we would never have to make again. The Devourers have returned, and conventional military response has proven inadequate." Admiral Grace presented the tactical analysis that confirmed everyone's worst fears. The refuge defense fleet was destroyed within 6 hours of first contact. Their combined fleets included ships from 23 species, representing the most advanced defensive technology available. None of it mattered. The Devourers consumed metal and energy with equal efficiency, growing stronger with each victory. Traditional weapons simply provided them with more raw materials to convert into additional war machines. Senator Bell, representing the pacifist colonies, raised the objection many council members were thinking. Surely there must be alternatives to reviving our darker traditions. Our current fleet could evacuate the survivors, provide humanitarian aid. To where? Asked General Park grimly. The Devourers don't stop at borders or negotiate truces. They consume until there's nothing left to consume. If we don't stop them at the refuge worlds, they'll eventually reach our space. Dr. North, humanity's chief military historian, accessed records that had been classified for 2 centuries. The Void Wars ended with humanity developing what we called Reaper Doctrine, military strategies specifically designed to terrify enemy forces into retreat or surrender. But the Devourers can't feel fear. "No," Kane said quietly, "but they can be destroyed. And the galaxy remembers why other species feared us." The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity's reputation during the Void Wars hadn't been built on superior technology or numerical advantage. It had been built on a willingness to cross lines that other species couldn't even approach. Captain Steele, now commanding the military archives, spoke from experience his colleagues lacked. "I've studied the classified reports from the Void Wars. Our ancestors didn't just fight the Devourers, they hunted them. They developed weapons and tactics so brutal that several allied species formally protested our methods. The historical records painted a picture of humanity at war that few modern humans could recognize. Ships designed to maximize psychological impact rather than tactical efficiency. Weapons that prioritized terror over destruction. Military doctrines that treated enemy morale as the primary target. The Reapers of the Void," Steele continued, "weren't just military units. They were symbols of humanity's willingness to become monsters, to protect what mattered. Other species fought to defend their territory. Humans fought to ensure their enemies never wanted to fight again. Admiral Grace activated classified blueprints that showed designs humanity had abandoned centuries ago. The shipyards at Titan still maintain the construction templates for Reaper-class vessels. We could have a limited fleet operational within 3 months. And the crews? Asked Senator Bell. Kane answered that question himself. Volunteers from the Colonial Marines. Men and women who understand what we're asking them to become. The debate continued for hours, with council members struggling to balance their peaceful principles against the reality of galactic extinction. Finally, Kane called for the vote that would resurrect humanity's darkest legacy. All in favor of authorizing Project Resurrection? The vote was unanimous, though several members visibly struggled with their decision. As the council session ended, Kane issued orders that would fundamentally change humanity's role in the galaxy. The shipyards at Titan received authorization to begin construction of vessels that hadn't been seen in 2 centuries. The military. Academies received new curriculum focusing on psychological warfare and terror tactics. The Colonial Marines began recruiting volunteers for the most dangerous assignment in human history. But perhaps most significantly, Kane authorized the revival of humanity's most classified military program, the one that had ended the Void Wars, by creating soldiers who specialized in becoming the galaxy's nightmares. Contact Colonel Fox, Kane ordered his aide. Tell him the Reapers are needed again. Deep in the military archives, files marked with skull symbols began to unlock for the first time in 200 years. Humanity was about to remember why the galaxy had once feared them more than any other force in the known universe. The refugees had asked for salvation. They were about to receive something far more dangerous. The awakening of legends. In the deepest levels of the Titan military complex, Colonel Jack Fox stood before a vault door that hadn't been opened in 2 centuries. The biometric scanners confirmed his identity and genetic authorization before massive locks disengaged with mechanical precision. Beyond the threshold lay humanity's most terrible secrets, the preserved knowledge of how to wage wars that could break an enemy's will to exist. Fox had volunteered for this assignment, knowing it would change him forever. The Reaper conditioning process wasn't just military training. It was psychological reconstruction designed to create soldiers who could function in scenarios that would drive normal humans insane. Sir? His aide Captain Lisa asked nervously. Are the historical accounts accurate? Did the original Reapers really? Worse, Fox replied as they entered the vault. The official records were sanitized. The truth is in here. The vault contained more than weapons and tactical manuals. It held the psychological profiles of the original Reapers, men and women who had volunteered to sacrifice their humanity to save their species. Video recordings showed the transformation. Process ordinary humans entering the program and monsters emerging. Dr. Mark, the military psychologist assigned to Project Resurrection, studied the conditioning protocols with growing unease. Sir, these methods were considered extreme even during wartime. The psychological modifications are essentially irreversible. Fox nodded grimly. The original Reapers couldn't return to normal society after the wars ended. Most requested permanent assignment to deep space monitoring stations where they wouldn't interact with civilians. The truth about humanity's victory in the Void Wars was darker than galactic history recorded. The Devourers had been defeated not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the application of psychological warfare, so intense that it had traumatized entire enemy fleets. Captain Mike led the first group of volunteers through the orientation process, explaining what they were volunteering for with brutal honesty. The Reaper conditioning will make you effective against any enemy. But it will also make you something that can't easily exist in peaceful society. You'll become living weapons designed for one purpose, making our enemies wish they had never encountered humanity. The volunteers came from across human space colonial marines who had seen too much combat, deep space explorers who had witnessed alien atrocities, and a few individuals who simply understood that sometimes civilization required monsters too. Protected, the shipyards at Titan began constructing vessels that defied every principle of modern human engineering. Where current ships prioritized efficiency and comfort, Reaper vessels were designed around psychological impact. Their hulls were black as the void itself, their shapes angular and predatory. Every design element was calculated to inspire fear in anyone who encountered them. Engineer Sarah supervised the construction of the lead vessel, a dreadnought christened Nightmare. "Sir," she reported to Admiral Grace, "the ship's systems are unlike anything in our current fleet. The artificial intelligence is programmed to optimize terror rather than tactical efficiency. The Nightmare and its sister ships incorporated technologies that humanity had developed specifically for psychological warfare, hull materials that absorbed light, creating vessels that appeared to be holes in space itself, sound systems that could broadcast fear-inducing frequencies across multiple communication bands. Even the ship's interior was designed to reinforce the crew's conditioning corridors. It felt like predatory throats, lighting that mimicked the depths of space. Dr. Ben studied the Devourer intelligence reports from the refuge worlds, looking for psychological vulnerabilities in an enemy that supposedly felt no emotions. "They're machines," he told his research team, "but they're machines designed by beings that once felt fear. Their programming still contains echoes of their creator's psychology." The breakthrough came when researchers realized that while individual Devourer units felt nothing, the collective intelligence that coordinated them retained some capacity for what might be called concern. The machine intelligence could recognize threats to its existence and modify its behavior. Accordingly, Colonel Fox completed his transformation 3 weeks ahead of schedule. When he emerged from the conditioning chambers, his own aide barely recognized him. The man who entered had been a career soldier with normal human emotions. The being who emerged moved with predatory grace and spoke with a voice that made listeners instinctively afraid. "Status report on fleet preparation," Fox requested, his tone carrying implications of violence that hadn't been heard in human space for centuries. "Sir," Captain Lisa replied, struggling not to show fear of her own commander, "the first squadron will be ready for deployment within days. The refuge worlds are requesting immediate assistance." Fox smiled, and the expression contained no trace of human warmth. "Good. It's time the galaxy remembered why they called us Reapers. And time the Devourers learned why their creators made us their greatest fear." The legends were awakening, and humanity was about to become something that could make even machines understand terror. The hunt begins. The first Reaper squadron dropped out of faster than light, travel at the edge of the refuge worlds like shadows materializing from the void itself. 6 ships emerged from hyperspace simultaneously, their black hulls absorbing local starlight until they appeared as holes in the fabric of space. Colonel Fox commanded the operation from the bridge of the Nightmare, studying tactical displays that showed the scope of the Devourer invasion. 17 systems had already fallen, their populations converted into raw materials for the ever-growing machine fleet. Traditional military doctrine would call for defensive positioning and gradual retreat. The Reapers had different plans. "Begin psychological reconnaissance," Fox ordered his crew. The Nightmare's sensors probed the Devourer fleet not for tactical weaknesses, but for behavioral patterns that revealed the machine intelligence's decision-making processes. Captain Tom, commanding the stealth ship Shadow, infiltrated the enemy formations using technology that hadn't been deployed in 2 centuries. His vessel could project false sensor readings while remaining essentially invisible, allowing close observation of Devourer operations. "Sir," Tom reported, "the machines are exhibiting classic swarm behavior. Individual units follow predictable algorithms, but the collective intelligence adapts based on perceived threats. They're learning from each engagement." This was exactly what Fox had expected. The Devourers were efficient because they analyzed enemy capabilities and adjusted their tactics accordingly. But their programming contained a flaw that the original Reapers had exploited. The machine intelligence couldn't properly process irrational behavior. Dr. Amy, the fleet's psychological warfare specialist, activated systems that would have horrified peaceful humanity, initiating fear projection protocols, broadcasting on all frequencies the machines use for coordination. The signals the Reapers transmitted weren't communications in any conventional sense. They were pure psychological warfare, sounds, images, and data patterns designed to trigger primal fear responses in any intelligence capable of experiencing emotion. While the Devourers themselves might not feel fear, their creators had, and traces of that original programming remained in their decision-making algorithms. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Devourer units began exhibiting erratic behavior, deviating from optimal attack patterns as their collective intelligence struggled to process the fear-inducing transmissions. Some units simply stopped moving, locked in processing loops as they tried to analyze threats that didn't conform to logical parameters. Phase 2, Fox commanded. Begin the hunt. The Reaper ships moved through the Devourer fleet like predators among prey, using tactics that prioritized psychological impact over tactical efficiency. Instead of engaging the largest threats first, they targeted units in ways that would maximize fear and confusion among the survivors. Captain Max, commanding the assault ship Terror, led close-quarters attacks designed to traumatize the machine intelligence. His ship used weapons that were deliberately inefficient, but psychologically devastating energy beams that took seconds to destroy targets instead of milliseconds, giving the collective intelligence time to register each loss and calculate the implications. "Sir," Max reported, "enemy fleet cohesion is breaking down. Individual units are fleeing despite receiving orders to maintain formation." This was the Reaper's true strength, their ability to make even emotionless machines behave irrationally. The Devourer's efficiency depended on perfect coordination between millions of individual units. When that coordination broke down, their advantage disappeared. The battle for the refuge worlds became a masterclass in psychological warfare. The Reapers didn't simply destroy Devourer ships, they made the machine intelligence afraid to commit its forces to battle. They used terror as a weapon more effective than any physical armament. Commander Kate led the evacuation of survivors from the contested worlds. But even this humanitarian mission served the Reapers' psychological strategy. They made sure the Devourer intelligence could observe the rescue operations, forcing it to calculate the implications of an enemy that could simultaneously wage war and protect civilians. "The machines are learning that we're unpredictable," Kate reported to Fox. "They can't develop effective countermeasures because we're not following logical tactical doctrine." The refuge survivors watched in amazement as humanity's dark legends tore through the seemingly invincible Devourer fleet. These weren't the peaceful traders and diplomats the galaxy had known for 2 centuries. These were the Reapers of the Void, the beings who had once made the galaxy tremble with fear. Elder Wise, leader of the Refuge Council, transmitted his gratitude to the human fleet. "We had heard the legends, but never believed them." "How did your species learn to fight like this?" Fox's response carried the weight of humanity's dark history. "We learned by accepting that sometimes civilization requires monsters. We became what we needed to become to protect what mattered." The hunt was only beginning, but already the Devourers were learning why their creators had once programmed them to fear the name humanity. The price of legend. 3 months after the first Reaper deployment, the Devourer invasion had been not merely stopped, but reversed. The machine intelligence that had consumed 17 star systems found itself retreating toward the galactic edge, its forces shattered by an enemy that fought according to no logical parameters. Colonel Fox stood on the bridge of the nightmare as his fleet pursued the fleeing Devourers through the void between galaxies. The machines had learned to fear humanity's approach, their collective intelligence developing what could only be described as trauma responses to Reaper psychological warfare. "Sir," reported Captain Lisa, "the enemy intelligence is broadcasting surrender offers on multiple frequencies. It's requesting negotiation terms." Fox almost smiled at the irony. The Devourers, machines designed for endless consumption, were begging for mercy from the species they had come to consume. But the Reapers had learned long ago that some enemies were too dangerous to leave alive. "Continue the pursuit," Fox ordered. "No survivors." The final battle took place in the void between galaxies, where the Devourer intelligence had attempted to establish a fallback position. The machine fleet, once numbering in the millions, had been reduced to a few thousand units that clustered around their central processing core like frightened children. The Reapers attacked with methodical brutality, using the fear they had instilled to paralyze enemy decision-making. The Devourer intelligence, traumatized by months of psychological warfare, could no longer coordinate effective resistance. Dr. Ben recorded the machine intelligence's final transmissions for historical analysis. "It's fascinating," he told his team. "The collective intelligence is displaying classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. It's unable to process tactical information because it's constantly anticipating the next psychological attack." The extinction of the Devourers was complete within hours. The machine intelligence that had once threatened galactic civilization simply ceased to function, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. The ancient enemy that had consumed countless worlds died not from superior firepower, but from psychological wounds that artificial minds couldn't heal. But victory came with a price that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The Reaper crews who returned to human space were no longer fully human. The psychological conditioning that made them effective against impossible enemies had also made them unable to exist comfortably in peaceful society. They moved like predators, spoke in voices that carried implications of violence, and saw threats where others saw friends. President Kane met with Colonel Fox in a secure facility on Luna, studying the man who had saved the galaxy and wondering what they had created. Fox looked human, but everything about his presence suggested contained violence that could be unleashed without warning. "Colonel," Kane said carefully, "the refuge worlds are requesting that Reaper forces remain in their territory as permanent guardians. They're afraid other threats might emerge." Fox considered this with the cold calculation that had replaced his human emotions. "Sir, the Reapers can't return to normal society. We've become something that civilian populations instinctively fear. Permanent exile might be the kindest solution for everyone." The other Reaper crews had reached similar conclusions. Captain Tom requested assignment to deep space monitoring stations where he wouldn't have to interact with ordinary humans. Captain Max volunteered for permanent patrol duty in the void between galaxies. None of them could imagine returning to the peaceful existence they had once known. The galaxy's reaction to humanity's resurrection of the Reapers was complex and troubling. The species that had been saved by human intervention expressed gratitude mixed with terror. They had witnessed humanity's capacity for salvation and damnation in equal measure. Ambassador Kate addressed the Galactic Council from New Geneva, trying to explain what humanity had done and why. "We resurrected our darkest legends because the situation demanded it. The Reapers saved billions of lives, but they also proved that humanity retains the capacity to become something that even we fear." The council members listened in silence, understanding that they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had voluntarily transformed some of their own people into monsters, then used those monsters to protect their enemies from extinction. Elder Wise of the Refuge World spoke for the survivors when he addressed the human delegation. We asked for aid and received salvation. But we also learned why the galaxy once feared your species more than any other force in the universe. As the Reapers departed for permanent exile in the dark spaces between stars, humanity faced the consequences of their decision. They had saved the galaxy by becoming something terrible, proving that sometimes civilization required monsters to survive. The legends had awakened when called upon, and they had fulfilled their purpose. But legends, once awakened, could never truly sleep again. Somewhere in the void, the Reapers continued their eternal patrol, ensuring that no force would ever again threaten the galaxy they had died to protect. The galaxy was safe, but it would never forget the price of that safety, or the species willing to damn themselves to provide it. Asterisk.